He sat on the soft slope of the hill, watching the stars flicker like distant lanterns in a universe that felt both enormous and familiar. The night hummed quietly around him, carrying whispers of places he had never been and memories that didn't quite belong to him. Somehow, in this vastness, he felt noticed, cared for, as if the universe itself leaned closer and whispered, "We love you. We truly care about you." Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching
From, and what time is it there?
Now grab your coffee or your tea and let's get started. Close your eyes for a moment and listen to the gentle hum of the cosmos, letting it fill the spaces between your thoughts. Morty had always been sensitive to these quiet things, noticing the small shifts in air, the way shadows bent softly around corners, the faint echoes of laughter that weren't his own. As a child, he often wondered if these tiny things were secret doors to somewhere else, or if the world was simply kinder to those who paid attention. Sometimes he would lie in bed at night, imagining the stars were stitched together with threads of memory, each one vibrating with someone else's story. It was a strange comfort, knowing that somewhere, somewhen, other hearts were stretching and growing in ways that mirrored his own. That night, the hill seemed endless, the wind gentle and coaxing, brushing across his skin like the touch of a hand that knew exactly how to soothe. Morty breathed slowly, feeling a kind of gentle awe settle over him, a feeling that life was more delicate and beautiful than most could ever notice. In the quiet, he remembered his mother's soft voice, her patience, her subtle laughter at moments that didn't seem funny to anyone else. He realized that care didn't always announce itself. It sometimes just lingered quietly, wrapping around you like the night itself. The air smelled faintly of grass and the distant smoke of a fire someone had long since left behind. Morty imagined other versions of this night existing somewhere else. Infinite hills, infinite skies, infinite stars, and each one offering the same small comfort. He understood then, even if only in a flicker, that love and care weren't always dramatic. They didn't have to be loud or urgent. Sometimes they simply were, like a soft song that plays quietly while the world turns. He leaned back into the gentle slope, feeling the earth beneath him solid and patient. Somewhere, a faint rustle of leaves sounded like applause, though there was no one there. He smiled softly, feeling the universe breathe with him, feeling that he was exactly where he needed to be, in the quiet, with the stars. And in that calm, he felt a whisper of something infinite, something tender, as though every choice, every small act of understanding he had ever made was part of a larger pattern, a quiet kind of magic stretching outward through all of existence. Night deepened, the stars brightened, and Morty felt sleep tug gently at the edges of his consciousness. He didn't need to rush, didn't need to understand. He only needed to feel, to be present, to notice the small miracles that hovered everywhere, in the wind, in the stars, in the unspoken connections that threaded through him and everyone he had ever met. And as he let himself sink into that feeling, he realized something simple, soft, and endless. That care, in its quietest form, was enough to carry you through anything. The next morning, the sunlight didn't rush in. It tiptoed, spilling across the room in thin, golden fingers. Morty woke slowly, the quiet rhythm of the house settling around him like a familiar lullaby. He could hear the soft creak of the floorboards as someone moved, small footsteps that carried more warmth than purpose. There was comfort in that subtle movement, a reminder that life, even in its most ordinary forms, held gentle patterns worth noticing. He wandered to the kitchen where the smell of toast and something sweetly baked lingered, though no one had yet spoken a word. His mother hummed softly, a tune that felt like it had existed before and would exist forever after, carrying the weightless memory of all the mornings they had shared. Morty didn't always understand her words, but he understood her heart, the quiet way it reached for him without needing attention or applause. That morning, even the sunlight seemed to lean in closer, wrapping him in warmth. As a child, he had learned that the world often offered strange little surprises, a wind that made the curtains dance without warning, the reflection of a bird. In a puddle that looked too big to be real, the sudden taste of sweetness on a tongue that had forgotten it existed. Morty had taken to watching carefully because he believed that noticing these small, strange things was a way of knowing the universe in its most intimate form. Each detail, each minor peculiarity became a thread that wove him quietly into the larger tapestry of existence. That day, Morty found himself lingering at the edge of the yard, watching a single cloud drift in a sky so blue it almost seemed unreal. He imagined it as a ship, slowly sailing over oceans that didn't exist, carrying passengers he might recognize if he looked long enough. He wondered if infinite versions of himself were doing the same thing somewhere else, leaning on fences, imagining clouds as ships, feeling the same soft awe that fluttered in his chest. It was a strange thought, but one that made him feel simultaneously small and expansive, like he was part of a secret he didn't need to fully understand. The afternoon passed without urgency. Morty noticed a flower bending toward the sun, the slight rustle of leaves in the breeze, the gentle curve of the fence posts that had always been there, but now seemed almost alive. He smiled quietly at the thought that these small things, overlooked, uncelebrated, could carry a kind of magic more enduring than loud, fleeting events. The world, he realized, had a way of whispering truths only those who listened closely could hear. By evening, the sky softened into muted purples and pinks. Morty sat on the porch steps, feeling the coolness of the wood seep into his fingers, grounding him in the present moment. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, faintly, as if to remind him that life was still moving, even in its slowest, gentlest rhythms. He thought of his mother again, of the warmth of her hands and the quiet constancy of her care. In that thought, he found a sense of belonging that was simple, complete, and unremarkable only to those who didn't notice. As darkness edged closer, Morty leaned back and let himself watch the first stars appear, remembering the hill from the night before. It felt like a continuation of a conversation the universe had begun, a dialogue in which he was neither questioned nor judged, only quietly received. He felt for the first time that day the steady pulse of being understood, that small, imperceptible resonance of care that could stretch across the vastness of space and time. And as he watched, he let sleep approach him like a gentle tide, slow, inevitable, and kind. Morty found himself walking through a quiet part of town he hadn't noticed before, though he could swear he had passed this street 100 times. The houses seemed softer here, their edges rounded as if they had grown over years, like the curves of a well-loved stone. Shadows pooled gently in the corners, and the occasional laugh or cough from a neighbor felt distant, but oddly comforting. He walked without purpose, letting his feet carry him, noticing how the pavement warmed under the early sun and how the air carried a faint scent of flowers and distant rain. He paused at a small fountain, water moving with a slow, deliberate grace. The gentle splash seemed almost musical, a quiet rhythm that matched the heartbeat in his chest. Morty tilted his head, listening as if the fountain had something to say only he could hear. And perhaps it did. He thought of all the small moments he had overlooked before. The soft brushing of a hand across a table, the whisper of leaves in a passing breeze, the way someone's smile could linger long after they had gone. Each tiny detail felt like a key, unlocking some small understanding he hadn't known he was missing. As he wandered further, Morty noticed a doorway tucked between two buildings, half hidden by creeping ivy. There was no sign, no indication that it led anywhere special, yet he felt a subtle pull, a sense that something waiting beyond the threshold was meant for him. Quietly, patiently, stepping closer, he could hear a faint hum, like the echo of a song he had known in a dream but never in waking life. The world seemed to bend slightly around this doorway, softening edges and muting colors, making the ordinary extraordinary. He imagined for a moment that every choice he had ever made had led him here, and that every small kindness, every fleeting moment of care, had been a thread woven into this one quiet tapestry. Morty realized that growth didn't always announce itself in grand gestures or dramatic revelations. It often came in these soft, strange, unremarkable moments that revealed themselves only when he paid attention. The doorway, the fountain, the faint smell of earth after rain, all of it was teaching him something simple and profound. The universe held beauty not in loudness, but in the quiet persistence of being present. He continued walking, noticing a small cat slinking through the shadows. It paused and looked at him with eyes that seemed almost human, calm and knowing. Morty smiled, feeling the gentle assurance that he wasn't truly alone. Even in moments that seemed ordinary, even in places that appeared empty, the world carried hints of connection, threads reaching out in ways he could barely perceive. The cat disappeared down an alley, leaving only a memory of its presence, and Morty felt lighter, as if a small weight he hadn't realized he carried had lifted. By late afternoon, the light softened and spread in long, gentle beams across the pavement. Morty sat on a bench, breathing slowly, letting the warm sun touch his skin. He thought of all the mornings, all the nights, where small gestures and unnoticed details had accumulated quietly into a sense of wonder he could carry wherever he went. Perhaps, he thought, this was what it meant to grow, to notice, to feel, and to understand that even the smallest moments could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. And as the first stars began to appear in the fading sky, Morty leaned back and let his eyes drift upward, letting the constellations speak to him in their silent, infinite language. He felt the comforting pulse of care, of being seen and remembered, echo through him. And with a quiet sigh, he allowed the evening to settle over him like a soft blanket, knowing that tomorrow and the day after would bring more of these gentle, strange lessons, quietly waiting. Morty wandered farther than usual that morning, the air cool and crisp, carrying a faint scent of distant rain. He paused at the edge of a small park, noticing a figure sitting alone on a bench, her posture both familiar and strange. There was a softness to her, a quiet patience, and yet something in her eyes mirrored his own restless curiosity. For a moment he hesitated, uncertain if he knew her, or if she belonged to another version of the world entirely. She looked up, and in that brief glance, Morty felt an unexpected calm. He didn't recognize her at first, but there was a resonance. In her presence, a familiarity that tugged gently at his heart. She smiled faintly, a gesture that wasn't loud or dramatic, but carried a depth of understanding. Morty realized slowly, almost too slowly to be certain, that this was Beth, or at least one of infinite Beths he had only just begun to imagine. The park seemed to pause around them, leaves hanging in the air, the sunlight stretching lazily through the trees. Morty approached, feeling a quiet mix of anticipation and comfort. She didn't speak immediately. She simply nodded, as if acknowledging his arrival and every unspoken thought that brought him there. Words felt unnecessary. At first, because in the silence there was already recognition. Morty had always been sensitive to such moments, the kind that existed between breaths, between heartbeats, between one life and another. They spoke eventually, softly, almost in whispers, as if their words were afraid of disturbing the stillness. Around them, Morty noticed the slight tilt of her head when she listened, the careful patience she offered in response to questions he hadn't realized he had. He realized that this Beth, though different from the one he had known, carried a similar weight of care and understanding. She had seen things, endured things, and yet her presence was gentle, like the surface of a lake undisturbed by wind. They shared small stories, details of days that seemed mundane, yet shimmered with quiet significance. Morty noticed how her laughter could linger without urgency, how she paid attention to tiny gestures, the way a bird might alight nearby or a leaf might drift down between them. These subtle moments became bridges between them, fragile yet enduring. In her company, Morty sensed the beginnings of a new understanding, that even across infinite possibilities, connection and care were constants, quietly threading through existence. The afternoon waned, and the park shifted to soft shades of gold and purple. Morty and Beth didn't rush toward conclusions or dramatic revelations. They simply existed together, feeling the resonance of shared time. Morty realized that understanding someone didn't always require explanations. It often required only presence, patience, and the gentle acknowledgement that they too were navigating the quiet complexities of life. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in muted, tender colors, Morty stood and stretched, feeling the calm settle into him. Beth watched him with quiet attentiveness, the kind that made words seem both unnecessary and insufficient. And in that unspoken space, Morty understood something profound, that some meetings, no matter how brief or strange, carried echoes that could last across lifetimes. With a soft smile, he turned to leave, carrying a subtle warmth in his chest that lingered like the faint scent of rain on the wind. Morty wandered home that evening with the soft weight of the day resting in his chest. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that invited reflection rather than unease. Each step seemed to echo just enough for him to notice the rhythm of his own presence, as if the world itself was reminding him that it moved alongside him, patiently, attentively. He thought about the Beth he had met, about the subtle kindness she had shown, and realized that understanding sometimes arrived in whispers rather than shouts. He remembered the small gestures that had marked his own childhood, the way his mother's hands had always been ready to catch a falling cup, the quiet humming she did while arranging the kitchen, the patience she offered when words failed him. Morty understood then that care often didn't announce itself. It simply existed, persistent, steady, waiting to be noticed. And noticing, he discovered, was its own quiet form of learning, a way of growing without fanfare. That night, he sat by his window watching the sky darken to deep indigo, punctuated by the soft flicker of distant stars. Each star seemed to pulse gently, as though breathing, and Morty imagined that each one carried a memory, a kindness, a moment of understanding from countless lives across the universe. He felt a warmth spread through him, a realization that even in the vastness he was part of something enduring, something patient and infinite. He reflected on the way people often spoke loudly to be heard, yet some of the most meaningful exchanges happened in silence. The universe, it seemed, had a way of teaching lessons quietly through small actions and gentle presence. Morty thought of the fountain, the hidden doorway, the quiet smile of Beth, and understood that growth was rarely explosive. It was a soft unfolding, like petals gradually opening to the sun, unnoticed except by those who paused to watch. A breeze drifted in through the window, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth. Morty leaned forward, letting it brush against his face, feeling the simple rhythm of the world beyond his room. He imagined that every gentle wind, every small rustle of leaves was a reminder of continuity, a way of connecting the ordinary to the infinite. In that space, he understood that wisdom was often found in attentiveness, in the ability to recognize and honor the quiet gestures that ripple through life. He thought about the day ahead, about the possibility of more small discoveries, more unnoticed kindnesses, more connections that required nothing but presence. Morty felt a gentle excitement, not the frantic kind, but the slow, comforting anticipation that comes from knowing life held subtle wonders in abundance. And as he let his eyes drift shut, he carried the soft certainty that noticing, understanding, and caring were themselves forms of quiet heroism, stretching across the cosmos in ways unseen but profoundly felt. The morning arrived slowly, unhurried, spilling a pale light across Morty's room. He moved as though in a dream, barefoot on the cool floor, listening to the distant hum of the neighborhood waking. There was a comfort in the predictability of ordinary life, the gentle rhythm of doors opening and closing, the faint scent of breakfast carried on the breeze. Morty realized that these small, unnoticed patterns often carried more weight than the moments that demanded attention. He made his way to the kitchen where the smell of toast and freshly brewed tea wrapped around him like a familiar song. His mother smiled quietly from the counter, her hands deftly arranging plates with care. Morty noticed the subtle grace in her movements, the way she seemed to infuse even the smallest task with intention. He understood that these acts, so ordinary on the surface, were themselves expressions of love, silent and enduring. After breakfast, Morty wandered into the yard, carrying a plate of crumbs for the birds. The wind moved softly through the trees, rustling leaves with a gentle insistence. He watched as the sparrows hopped and pecked, their small bodies moving with purpose, yet unaware of the quiet joy they were spreading simply by existing. Morty smiled, feeling a resonance between their simple attentiveness and his own growing awareness. He noticed how light fell through the branches, scattering across the grass in irregular patterns that seemed almost intentional. Morty imagined that the sun itself was performing a quiet ritual, offering warmth and clarity to anyone willing to pause and notice. There was a strange, meditative magic in such ordinary moments, a sense that the universe had designed its beauty to be subtle, patient, and personal. Later, he found a small bench tucked behind a row of shrubs, hidden from immediate view. Morty sat and let the afternoon unfold around him, feeling the slow passage of time as something gentle and nourishing rather than urgent. Shadows moved across the ground like soft sketches. Birds chirped faintly, and the wind whispered through the leaves with a voice that seemed almost sentient. Each sound, each movement carried a quiet meaning, a reassurance that presence itself was enough. Morty reflected on the way care often appeared in the smallest gestures, a hand brushing away a tear, a shared meal, a smile that lingered longer. the necessary. He realized that magic didn't always arrive in dramatic bursts or loud declarations. It sometimes existed in crumbs, in soft wind, in fleeting connections that left an imprint without demanding recognition. The world, he thought, was quietly generous, offering comfort and wonder to those who chose to see it. As evening approached, the sky shifted from pale gold to gentle pinks and blues. Morty lay back on the bench, watching the clouds drift lazily above him. He felt a sense of calm that was both simple and profound, as if the universe itself had reached down to brush the edges of his consciousness with a soft, understanding hand. And as he let the fading light and soft air lull him into stillness, he carried the quiet knowledge that ordinary moments, unnoticed and gentle, were enough to nurture the heart and spirit. Morty noticed, as he wandered the familiar streets, that certain patterns seemed to repeat themselves almost imperceptibly. A sparrow would hop across the same patch of grass, a leaf would tumble in the same gentle spiral, shadows would stretch across the pavement in the same soft angles. At first, he thought it was coincidence, but there was something in the repetition that felt deliberate, as if the world itself was teaching him patience and attention. He paused on a small bridge overlooking the creek, the water moving steadily beneath him, never the same twice yet, somehow identical in its quiet rhythm. Morty felt a deep calm settle in his chest, a sense that these gentle loops carried a secret he didn't yet need to fully understand. Time, he realized, could stretch and fold in ways that felt soft and comforting, like the arms of a caregiver, enveloping him in a quiet embrace. A gentle wind stirred the trees, and Morty watched leaves drift slowly, circling in patterns that seemed almost musical. He thought of all the mornings he had spent rushing past moments like these, unaware of their quiet significance. Now, sitting on the bridge, he understood that noticing the loops, the echoes of light and movement, was itself a kind of learning, subtle, patient, and deeply nourishing. He remembered the Beth he had met, the quiet ways she had listened and acknowledged without rushing or demanding. Those small interactions felt like part of the same pattern, a gentle repetition of care that threaded through his days and the infinite possibilities he imagined. Morty smiled softly, feeling a sense of connection to everything around him, from the smallest leaf to the farthest star that flickered faintly in the morning sky. The afternoon light shifted, softening everything it touched, and Morty walked slowly, letting the rhythm of his footsteps match the subtle cadence of the world. He noticed that the same moments could feel new if he paid attention, that patterns were not restrictions but invitations to observe, to feel, to reflect. The universe, he realized, had a patient way of teaching him that life was both predictable and miraculous, and that noticing its gentle repetitions could carry him farther than any frantic effort ever could. By evening, the sky had taken on soft shades of lavender and gold, and Morty found himself back at the hill where he had watched the stars before. He leaned back against the earth, feeling the familiar curve of the slope beneath him, the wind brushing softly against his face. The loops of the day, the patterns of shadow and light, carried a subtle reassurance that continuity itself was comforting, that existence could be gentle and steady, and that even small acts of attention or kindness had meaning across time and space. As he let the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Morty felt a quiet contentment, a realization that the world's gentle loops were like lullabies, carrying the soft resonance of care and presence into every moment. And as sleep began to edge closer, he let himself drift with the rhythm of the universe, trusting in the slow, tender unfolding of everything around him. Morty thought about Rick that evening, not with fear or excitement, but with quiet curiosity. The older man's presence had always been a kind of shadow in his life, unpredictable, immense, sometimes bewildering, but somehow familiar. Morty realized that he didn't need to fully understand Rick to feel the subtle ways he shaped the
world around him.
There was a softness hidden beneath the chaos, a flicker of care in moments that often seemed sharp or careless. He remembered afternoons when Rick had spoken quietly, sharing thoughts that lingered longer than words usually do. Sometimes it was a joke, a flicker of insight, or a story that seemed too strange to be true. Morty had learned, slowly, that understanding didn't always arrive immediately. It grew quietly in the spaces between gestures and explanations, in the ways someone listened or remembered something small about you without fanfare. That night, Morty watched the stars, thinking of the infinite possibilities that Rick had opened up for him. He imagined the multiverse not as a chaotic expanse, but as a delicate web, each thread vibrating with care and connection in ways he could only feel, not always see. There was a strange beauty in that thought, that someone so complex could leave traces of guidance and warmth, even in silence or absence. He remembered the small lessons hidden in Rick's actions, the patient construction of a device that no one else would notice, the gentle insistence that Morty pay attention to details others might overlook, the fleeting moments when a hand rested lightly on a shoulder, grounding him. Morty began to see that quiet heroism wasn't about grand gestures or loud declarations. It was about the subtle, persistent presence of someone who noticed and cared, even imperfectly. As the evening deepened, Morty felt a calm settle over him. He thought of Rick, not as a figure to fear or emulate, but as someone whose existence reminded him that understanding, connection, and care often come in unexpected forms. The universe was vast, yes, but the smallest acts, a shared glance, a soft word, an unnoticed gesture, could ripple across time and space in ways both tender and enduring. Morty leaned back, feeling the curve of the hill beneath him, the wind brushing against his face in soft, unpredictable patterns. Somewhere in the distance, a faint hum of life carried to him. A dog barking, a leaf fluttering, a door closing gently. All of it seemed connected, part of a quiet rhythm he was only beginning to perceive. And as sleep drifted toward him, he let himself trust in the soft, strange beauty of existence, knowing that even the most complicated hearts could hold tenderness, and even the quietest actions could leave lasting traces. Morty found himself in a quiet, sun-dappled room, sitting across from several Beths, each one familiar yet subtly different. Their presence was calm, measured, almost like the gentle turning of pages in a book he had long ago started but never finished. He didn't feel rushed or pressured, only invited to notice the nuances of each expression, each small tilt of the head, each pause that spoke louder than words. They spoke softly, in voices that blended like a chorus, carried on a gentle wind. Morty realized that he didn't need to understand every word. He only needed to listen to feel the resonance of their intentions, their care, their subtle wisdom. One Beth shared a quiet story of a morning she had remembered fondly. Another mentioned a fleeting feeling of worry that had long since passed, and another simply nodded, eyes soft and attentive. Each small revelation left an impression, like drops of water on a calm pond, creating ripples that extended farther than he could perceive. Morty noticed patterns among them, gentle echoes that connected moments across the infinite variations of their lives. He saw how each Beth had grown from small acts of patience, quiet observation and restrained courage. It struck him that growth didn't always come from struggle or noise. Sometimes it was built slowly in the soft spaces between words and actions, in the moments that were too subtle for most to notice. He smiled softly as he realized something profound. Even across countless possibilities, certain truths endured. Care, attention, understanding. These were constants that wove through every version of the world, every version of the people he loved. Morty felt the warmth of connection, fragile yet unbreakable, stretching across the room, the house, and the infinite reaches of time and space. The afternoon light shifted, casting gentle shadows across their faces. Morty leaned back, breathing, slowly, letting the quiet resonance of the room settle into him. He understood that he was part of this web now, not as an observer, but as someone whose presence mattered, whose attention amplified the gentle threads of care already present. There was no urgency, no need for conclusions. The simple act of being there, listening, noticing, was enough. As the day faded toward evening, Morty watched the light bend and stretch, observing the delicate interplay of shadow and warmth. He thought of each Beth as a mirror, reflecting aspects of him he had only glimpsed in fleeting moments. And as he let the subtle harmony of their presence wash over him, he felt a quiet, almost imperceptible shift, an understanding that connection could be both vast and intimate, infinite and personal, all at once. Morty lay on a soft hill as clouds drifted lazily above him, shifting shapes in ways that felt almost deliberate. The sky stretched wide and calm, pale blue melting into gentle streaks of gold as the sun leaned toward evening. He watched the clouds move slowly, imagining them carrying stories, fragments of memory, small pieces of heart scattered across the world. There was a strange comfort in the thought that even drifting shapes could hold meaning, and that the world offered these quiet miracles for anyone willing to pause and notice. A breeze rustled through the grass, brushing against Morty's face like a soft exhale. He felt the gentle rhythm of his own breathing align with the movement of the clouds, a slow dance that carried both presence and reflection. Morty realized that sometimes understanding arrived not through words, but through observation, through the patient recognition of patterns in the simplest of things. A cloud bent over like a leaning hand, another stretched thin and long, and he imagined each one as a message, subtle, patient, enduring. He thought about the Beths he had met, the quiet lessons learned in their company, and the ways small acts of care could ripple across infinite possibilities. Morty understood in a gentle flicker that empathy could stretch just like the clouds above, expansive, malleable, resilient. It didn't need to be shouted or proven, it only needed attention, the willingness to feel the weight of another's presence without judgment or haste. As the afternoon light softened into pink and lavender, Morty allowed his thoughts to drift, following the clouds as they floated over the horizon. He imagined the tiny creatures beneath them, the leaves on the trees, the unseen lives moving in their own subtle patterns. Each element seemed to pulse with quiet intention, as if the universe itself was a careful observer, watching, listening, and offering reassurance in the gentlest ways. A flock of birds passed overhead, slicing through the sky with delicate precision. Morty noticed the arcs they formed, the rhythm of their wings, and felt a quiet joy in the synchronicity, a reminder that connection could exist without words, without acknowledgement, simply in shared motion. He felt a small, warm understanding. That noticing, truly noticing, was a way of participating in the subtle dance of life, a way of honoring the quiet forces that shaped the world. The sun leaned lower, painting the clouds in muted golds and purples, and Morty felt sleep tugging.
Gently, at the edges of his consciousness.
He let himself sink into the sensation, carried by the rhythm of wind, sky, and memory. And as the stars began to peek through the fading light, he felt an expansiveness within himself, a soft stretch of empathy, patience, and quiet awe that mirrored the drifting clouds above. Morty wandered along a narrow path through the edge of town, noticing how the sunlight caught on the leaves and painted patterns across the ground. He came across a small child sitting alone on a bench, their expression uncertain and hesitant. Morty felt a quiet tug in his chest, an instinctive awareness that sometimes small gestures could matter more than grand actions. Without thinking, he sat down beside the child and offered a soft smile, letting presence speak louder than words. The child glanced up, wary at first, but then something shifted. Morty didn't rush to speak or explain. He simply listened, letting the silence carry the weight of understanding. Moments passed gently, each one leaving a subtle imprint, like dew settling on grass. Morty realized that courage didn't always roar. It sometimes whispered, a quiet readiness to be there when someone else needed it most. He remembered the lessons he had learned from his mother, from Rick, and from the Beths, that care could be gentle, patient, and deliberate without demanding recognition. And now, in this small, ordinary moment, he understood the quiet power of being attentive. He offered his hand to the child, a gesture both simple and profound, and the child took it without hesitation. Morty felt a warmth spread through him, a small echo of something enduring that stretched beyond the confines of that park bench. As they walked together along the winding path, Morty noticed the way sunlight shifted in soft arcs, how shadows bent over leaves, and how the air seemed to carry a hum of reassurance. He realized that heroism wasn't measured in grand gestures or loud declarations. It was found in acts of quiet presence, in subtle attentiveness, in the willingness to offer kindness when it was needed most, even if it went unseen by the rest of the world. The child laughed softly at something insignificant, a bird hopping too close, the sway of a branch. And Morty felt the simple joy of shared attention. He noticed the rhythm of their steps matching, the breeze brushing past both of them, carrying the faint scent of flowers and earth. Each small detail became a gentle lesson in patience, empathy, and the enduring beauty of noticing. By evening, the sun leaned low, scattering muted gold and violet across the horizon. Morty and the child reached the edge of the park and paused, watching shadows lengthen and the first stars peek into the darkening sky. Morty felt a soft, abiding satisfaction, the kind that comes from understanding that even the smallest acts of care could leave ripples far larger than one could imagine. And as the night settled gently around them, he allowed sleep to brush his mind with quiet reassurance, knowing that these tiny, deliberate acts of presence were the kind of heroism that could stretch endlessly, quietly, and beautifully across time. The night was calm when Morty wandered along the quiet streets, the soft glow of lanterns stretching like gentle fingers across the pavement. Shadows moved slowly, elongating and shrinking in a subtle dance that seemed both deliberate and spontaneous. Morty noticed the smallest details, the curve of a lamppost, the flicker of light across a window pane, the gentle rustle of leaves, stirred by a passing breeze. Each movement carried a quiet significance, a whisper of understanding if one only chose to notice. He paused at a corner where the light fell unevenly, casting long, soft shadows across the ground. Morty watched the shapes stretch and bend, realizing that shadows could be more than absence. They could carry emotion, a subtle reflection of the world's presence. In their quiet movement, he sensed patterns, rhythms, and connections invisible to those who rushed past without care. There was a strange, comforting reassurance in their patience, a gentle reminder that not everything needed to be loud to matter. A small cat slinked from the alley, its movements precise and careful. Morty observed its graceful steps, noticing how even tiny actions could ripple outward in ways unseen but deeply felt. The cat paused, turning its gaze toward him, eyes reflective and still, as if acknowledging his presence and the quiet attentiveness he offered. Morty smiled softly, sensing a faint resonance between the calm of the animal and his own gentle observation. The air carried faint hints of damp earth, a lingering trace of earlier rain that seemed to connect every element of the night. Morty inhaled slowly, letting the scent and the soft glow of light settle within him. Each step forward felt deliberate yet effortless, a rhythm in harmony with the subtle pulse of the world. He thought of Rick, the Beths, and the child he had helped, realizing that care and attention were threads that wove through each moment, each connection, regardless of scale. As the evening deepened, Morty found a small bench beneath a lamplight, its glow soft and unwavering. He sat, letting the quiet warmth settle over him, and watched the gentle interplay of light and shadow dance across the street. Morty understood that presence was not just physical, it was emotional, perceptive, a subtle offering to the world and its inhabitants. He felt a steady calm, a quiet wonder, a recognition that even the simplest act of noticing carried weight, depth, and beauty. Above, stars began to appear, faint and patient, punctuating the sky with delicate points of light. Morty leaned back, letting the soft rhythms of the night wash over him, feeling the gentle pull of sleep edging his thoughts. He allowed himself to rest within the quiet, trusting in the subtle magic of shadows, light, and the persistent, tender attention of a heart willing to see. And as the night enveloped him, he felt the quiet reassurance that caring, noticing, and being present were themselves luminous, infinite gestures. Morty wandered slowly through the old streets, noticing familiar corners that had changed ever so slightly since his last visit. The bricks were worn, the paint slightly faded, yet there was a comforting constancy in the shapes and shadows. He paused at a small fountain, remembering the way water had danced there years ago, how he had watched it ripple and bend with quiet fascination. Memory felt like a soft tide, washing over him with warmth and gentle clarity, reminding him that growth often arrived in tiny, unnoticed increments. He thought of mornings with his mother when sunlight had spilled across the kitchen table in golden slivers catching dust and small motes of memory alike. Morty realized that these moments, once considered ordinary, now carried a weight of meaning he had only begun to perceive. Even the briefest glimpses of attention or care could ripple through time, leaving subtle traces that quietly shaped who he had become. Passing an old bookstore, Morty noticed the familiar scent of paper and ink, the quiet promise of stories waiting to be discovered. He imagined the lives contained within those pages, each one a tiny echo of possibility, each narrative a reflection of subtle truths. It occurred to him that memory itself functioned in a similar way. Small fragments, seemingly inconsequential, forming a tapestry that carried wisdom, comfort, and understanding across years. Morty paused on a quiet bench, letting the warmth of the sun touch his face, and thought of the Beths he had met. He remembered their soft words, the subtle guidance and care they had offered without fanfare. In each interaction, he saw reflections of himself, both fragile and strong, tentative yet willing to reach toward connection. He realized that understanding didn't always come in leaps. It grew, quietly, patiently, through observation, reflection, and the deliberate noticing of what others might overlook. A soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead, carrying with it the faint scent of flowers and distant rain. Morty felt the gentle rhythm of the world around him, each small movement a reminder that life's quiet patterns often held profound significance. He thought of all the small acts of care he had witnessed, and of his own tiny gestures, the shared glance, the patient, listening, the faint, almost imperceptible offering of presence. Each one felt like a thread, tying moments together in a tapestry both delicate and resilient. As the afternoon waned, the sky softened into muted purples and golds. Morty leaned back on the bench, letting the calm settle over him like a familiar blanket. He reflected on memory and growth, on the quiet heroism of attentiveness, on the beauty found in the persistent rhythm of ordinary days. And as sleep began to edge in, he let himself rest within the awareness that even small, gentle moments carried the power to shape life, to nurture connection, and to leave an enduring, tender imprint on the heart. Morty sat quietly beneath the sprawling branches of an old tree, the sunlight filtering softly through the leaves. He noticed the subtle movements of the branches, the way light bent and shifted across the ground, and felt a gentle awareness settle in his chest. It was as if the world itself was inviting him to pause, to witness the quiet transformations unfolding around him and within him. He thought about the way he had changed over time, how small experiences had rippled through him, altering the shape of his thoughts, his reactions, and the tender ways he interacted with others. Morty realized that growth was rarely sudden or dramatic. It was a gentle process, woven through moments of attentiveness, small acts of care, and reflections on what he had seen and felt. Each day left a faint imprint, a quiet echo that slowly accumulated into something lasting. A breeze drifted by, carrying the scent of distant rain and warm earth. Morty inhaled deeply, letting the world's subtle rhythms align with his own. He thought of Rick, the Beths, and the child he had helped, noticing how each presence had left a soft resonance within him. Empathy, he understood, was not a single act, but a persistent awareness, a willingness to notice, to care, and to respond with patience and attention. The tree's shadow shifted, moving slowly across the grass, and Morty observed how the interplay of light and dark carried a quiet lesson. Life's small contradictions, its subtle tensions, were not meant to be resolved in a single moment. They were to be witnessed, absorbed, and reflected upon, forming layers of understanding that deepened with time. Morty felt a sense of quiet pride in his own capacity to notice, to feel, and to carry these lessons gently within himself. He closed his eyes for a moment, imagining the infinite variations of his life, the countless possibilities that might exist in other worlds under other skies. Each version of himself, he realized, shared common threads. The soft awareness of beauty, the willingness to care, and the patient cultivation of understanding. It was a comforting thought, a reminder that even in the vastness of possibility, certain truths endured, quietly and faithfully. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in muted gold and soft violet, Morty allowed himself to sink into stillness. He felt the gentle pull of sleep, the slow release of tension from body and mind. And as night approached, he understood that the quiet attention he had practiced, the subtle care he had offered and received, had accumulated into a reservoir of tenderness he could draw upon at any time. It was enough. Morty wandered through the quiet streets in the early morning, noticing details he had passed by countless times before. A stray cat paused to watch him, its tail curling with delicate curiosity. A ribbon of sunlight fell across a cracked sidewalk, painting it gold for a brief moment. Morty realized that these small, ordinary occurrences carried a subtle joy, a quiet satisfaction that didn't demand recognition, but nourished the heart nonetheless. He paused to watch a pair of birds flutter between the rooftops, their wings catching the soft morning light. Morty felt a calm resonance in observing them, a gentle reminder that beauty could exist without spectacle, that attention alone could cultivate wonder. The world, he thought, offered constant opportunities for quiet delight if one only slowed down enough to notice. Later, Morty visited a familiar corner store where the shopkeeper greeted him with a soft smile. No words were necessary. The acknowledgement itself carried warmth. Morty purchased a small pastry and carried it to a bench nearby, watching the slow rhythm of life unfold around him. He noticed children laughing in the distance, leaves drifting lazily in the breeze, and the subtle sway of telephone wires overhead. Each small motion, each faint sound, seemed to hold significance, like whispered stories waiting to be understood. He reflected on the gentle connections he had made with
Rick, the Beths, the child in the park, and how each interaction left a trace, however faint, within him.
Morty realized that relationships, like patterns of light and shadow, were built not from grand gestures, but from consistent attentiveness and quiet care. The smallest acts of noticing, the softest words, or the simplest smile could ripple outward, shaping days and hearts in ways unseen yet profoundly felt. As afternoon drifted into evening, Morty lay on the hill where he often watched the sky change color. Clouds moved slowly above, painted in shades of gold, pink and lavender, and he felt an unspoken connection to their gentle, unhurried rhythm. The passing moments, he understood, were themselves gifts, tiny fragments of time that, when observed, carried the quiet richness of life. By nightfall, the first stars began to appear, small pinpricks of light that seemed to pulse with patience. Morty leaned back, letting the cool grass cradle him, feeling the subtle hum of life surrounding him. He realized that small joys, subtle attentiveness, and quiet connections formed a network of care that stretched across days, years, and even possibilities beyond comprehension. And as sleep drew him in, he rested in the knowledge that noticing, loving gently, and being present were acts of quiet heroism that required no applause, only awareness and heart. Morty walked along the familiar streets as dusk settled softly over the town, the fading light casting gentle, elongated shadows. He noticed the subtle rhythm of life. A cat padding silently across a fence, a few leaves drifting slowly in the breeze, the distant hum of a car that seemed almost musical in its repetition. Morty felt the quiet pulse of the world around him, as if every small detail was part of a hidden pattern he was only beginning to perceive. He paused by the fountain at the center of the square, watching the water rise and fall with soft persistence. It struck him that the world often communicated in cycles, in loops that repeated and shifted, unnoticed by most. Morty realized that patterns existed not to confine or predict, but to offer comfort, a sense that even the smallest actions, observed carefully, had resonance. He felt a warmth spread through him at the thought that his attention could recognize and honor these patterns, however imperceptibly. Morty thought of the Beths he had met, of the child in the park, of Rick, and the ways each had left subtle traces on his own consciousness. He noticed how care, patience, and understanding seemed to follow a quiet, repeating rhythm across lives and experiences. These moments weren't always dramatic or loudly announced. They existed in whispers, soft gestures, fleeting glances, and the gentle acknowledgement of presence, each one built upon the last, forming an invisible network of connection that tied him to the world more deeply than he had realized. The streetlights flickered on one by one, spilling warm circles of light onto the pavement. Morty walked slowly. Beneath them, observing how shadows bent, twisted, and stretched with their glow. He imagined that emotions followed a similar rhythm, some fleeting and subtle, others more persistent, yet all connected in ways that could be sensed if he paid
attention.
Morty felt a quiet awe at the thought that life's patterns were not only physical, but emotional, that the universe allowed him to see and feel them if he simply slowed down enough. He paused on a small bench, letting the cool air brush against his skin and reflected on the gentle heroism of attentiveness. Each act of noticing, each small gesture of care, each quiet presence contributed to the pattern of connection that stretched across days, years, and possibilities. Morty understood that this awareness, the ability to perceive, to feel, to honor subtle patterns, was a form of wisdom, quietly cultivated and deeply sustaining. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Morty leaned back and let the gentle night envelop him. The world seemed to hum softly in response to his presence, each sound, each movement resonating with quiet significance. And as sleep began to tug at the edges of his consciousness, Morty carried the realization that he was part of an intricate, tender network of existence, a tapestry woven from noticing, care, and enduring subtle patterns of connection. Morty wandered along the edge of town as twilight deepened, the air carrying a subtle chill that felt comforting rather than sharp. The sky stretched wide and soft above him, streaked with fading gold and lavender, and he noticed how each color seemed to fold into the next with patient grace. He slowed his steps, letting the quiet of the evening seep into him, carrying a sense of calm that he had not known he
needed. He observed a small puddle reflecting the shifting sky, the ripples forming delicate patterns as a light breeze passed over. Morty bent slightly to watch, noticing the way each movement altered the reflection, creating a soft, ever-changing dance.
He realized that the world often offered beauty not in grand displays but in subtle shifts, patterns and moments of quiet attention. And just as the water adapted to the wind, he too felt capable of bending with life's gentle rhythms without losing his center. A cat slinked across the path, pausing to rub against a lamp post. Morty smiled softly, noticing the quiet confidence in the creature's movements. Even in small, ordinary actions there was a grace and attentiveness that spoke to him in ways words could not. He understood that wonder did not always demand spectacle. Sometimes it lived in the smallest, most overlooked corners of the world, waiting for someone to notice. Morty's thoughts drifted to the Beths he had encountered, the child in the park, and Rick. He remembered the quiet lessons threaded through those interactions: patience, empathy, attentiveness, and the gentle ripple of small acts of care. Each memory felt like a soft echo, layering over the present and infusing it with meaning. Morty sensed that these threads of connection, though subtle, had enduring significance, binding his experiences together in ways he was only beginning to perceive. As the stars began to emerge, faint and patient, Morty found a small hill to sit upon. He let the wind brush lightly against his face, the distant hum of life surrounding him like a lullaby. In the quiet, he felt a growing appreciation for the unnoticed, the fleeting, the subtle moments that carried weight far beyond their apparent simplicity. Every small gesture, every gentle observation, every soft connection became part of a vast, intricate tapestry of being. Leaning back on the hill, Morty allowed sleep to draw him closer, the world around him humming in gentle resonance. He felt a quiet gratitude for the rhythm of life, for the beauty that could be found in small patterns, and for the subtle ways the universe communicated care, presence, and attention. And as the night settled over the land, Morty rested in the soft wonder of existence, trusting that even the smallest observations carried profound meaning, quietly stretching across time and space. Morty walked slowly through the quiet streets, noticing the lingering traces of past days in the soft impressions left on the world. A shop window reflected the fading sunlight, catching dust and small motes of memory in its glow. Morty paused, letting the sight linger, and realized that every place held echoes of the people and moments that had passed through it. Memory, he understood, was not confined to the mind. It existed subtly in the world itself, waiting to be noticed. He thought of the Beths he had met, each one a reflection of care, patience, and subtle guidance. The child in the park came to mind as well, the small acts of attention he had shared, rippling quietly in ways he could not fully measure. Morty realized that these experiences were threads woven into a larger tapestry, a gentle network of connection that stretched across time, space, and possibility. The patterns were often imperceptible, yet their presence was undeniable once he chose to notice. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched like soft fingers across the pavement, Morty observed how light and memory intertwined. Each shadow seemed to carry a quiet story, each reflection a fragment of the past. He felt the subtle weight of continuity, the reassurance that life's moments, even those that seemed insignificant, left traces that could endure, persist, and guide in ways invisible but deeply real. A breeze rustled through the trees, lining the street, carrying faint scents of earth, flowers, and distant rain. Morty inhaled deeply, allowing the sensory impressions to anchor him in the present while evoking the gentle resonance of memory. He realized that awareness was a bridge between past and present, between observation and understanding, and that simply noticing the traces of life's passage was itself an act of quiet care. He paused on a familiar bench beneath a lamplight, feeling the warmth of the last sun rays mixing with the emerging glow of evening. Morty reflected on the subtle heroism embedded in ordinary moments, the soft words, the gentle gestures, the willingness to be present for someone else. These small acts, he understood, were the legacy that endured, the quiet threads of tenderness and connection that wove through days, years, and even infinite possibilities. As darkness settled, stars emerged patiently in the sky, tiny points of light that mirrored the faint but persistent traces of memory and care in Morty's mind. He leaned back, letting the quiet resonance of the night and the soft pull of sleep carry him gently. In the stillness, he felt a profound sense of continuity, of connection, and of the enduring power of noticing, loving gently and honoring, the quiet imprints left in both the world and his own heart. Morty wandered along the quiet edge of town, the night soft around him, the faint glow of lanterns casting delicate pools of light. He noticed the gentle rhythm of his footsteps, the subtle shifts in the air, and the way shadows leaned slowly across familiar walls. It struck him that even in ordinary, unremarkable moments, there was a quiet significance waiting to be recognized. Each small detail carried the weight of presence, attention, and care. He thought of the child in the park, the Beths, and even Rick, realizing that small acts of kindness, a smile, a shared glance, a moment of listening, created ripples far beyond immediate perception. Morty understood that heroism did not always roar. Sometimes it existed quietly, folded into the rhythm of daily life, leaving traces that endured without need for recognition or fanfare. A gentle breeze drifted by, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked earth and distant flowers. Morty inhaled slowly, letting the sensory rhythm connect him to the wider world. He noticed the stars beginning to punctuate the sky, their patient light a reminder that even in vast spaces, subtle presence persisted. Each twinkle felt like a whisper, affirming that small intentional acts had meaning and resonance, stretching across time and space in ways unseen but profoundly felt. Morty paused on a small hill, watching shadows stretch and bend over the landscape. He reflected on his own capacity for quiet courage, the times he had chosen attentiveness over distraction, presence over indifference, and empathy over impatience. These choices, he realized, were cumulative, building an unseen network of connection and care that bound him to the people and moments around him. He thought of light as more than illumination, but as a metaphor for subtle action. The way a candle softens a dark room, the way a gentle hand steadies a trembling one, the way a shared smile ripples across hearts. Morty felt a growing calm, a recognition that his own quiet choices contributed to patterns of care in the world, however small, however unnoticed. As the night deepened, the sky rich with stars, Morty lay back on the cool grass, letting the wind
brush against him and the quiet hum of life settle around him.
He understood with soft clarity that lasting impact often came not from grandeur, but from the patient, gentle choices made each day. And as sleep drifted toward him, he rested in the knowledge that quiet heroism, attentiveness, and care were threads that wove him into the fabric of the universe, subtle yet enduring. Morty wandered along the edge of the quiet town as the evening softened into night. The air carried a faint scent of earth and distant rain, a reminder that life persisted gently even in unnoticed corners. Shadows stretched across familiar streets, bending and folding with the glow of lanterns, and Morty felt the slow pulse of the world as if it were breathing alongside him. There was a rhythm in this quietness, a gentle cadence that invited patience, observation, and reflection. He paused at a small fountain where water rippled with soft persistence, reflecting the muted lights around it. Morty watched the ripples expand outward, realizing that actions, no matter how small, created subtle patterns in the world. Just as each movement of water shaped its surroundings, his own quiet attentiveness had left impressions on those he had encountered, the Beths, the child in the park, even Rick, in moments of fleeting connection. These traces, though delicate, carried weight and meaning far beyond immediate perception. The stars began to emerge, faint points of light against a deepening sky, and Morty felt a resonance in their patient presence. He thought about memory and connection, how the smallest gestures, a soft word, a shared smile, a moment of listening, could ripple through time and space. The world, he realized, was quietly generous, offering opportunities for understanding, care, and wonder to anyone willing to pause and notice. A breeze drifted past, brushing against Morty's face and rustling the leaves overhead. He noticed how shadows bent and light shimmered across the ground, and he understood that life's beauty often existed in patterns too subtle for most to perceive. Each gentle loop of experience, each quiet repetition, offered lessons in patience, empathy, and presence. Morty felt a calm certainty that noticing these small, fleeting moments was itself an act of care, for the world and for himself. He continued along the path, observing the soft interplay of light and shadow, the delicate arcs of movement in birds, the faint hum of life around him. Morty reflected on the quiet heroism of attentiveness, the enduring power of small acts of care, and the way subtle connections threaded through each day, unobserved yet profoundly significant. As he leaned back on a familiar bench, the night wrapping him in its cool embrace, he allowed himself to sink into stillness, trusting in the persistent, gentle rhythm of life. Sleep began to edge closer, carrying a sense of reassurance that even small, unnoticed acts could resonate deeply and quietly. Morty let the gentle cadence of the night, the patterns of light and shadow, and the subtle echoes of connection lull him toward rest. And as he closed his eyes, he felt a profound sense of calm, knowing that presence, attentiveness, and care were threads woven across time, space, and memory, enduring, subtle, and infinite. Morty walked along the quiet streets under a sky slowly darkening into deep indigo. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of earth and distant flowers, and he noticed the subtle shifts in light as lanterns flickered on one by one. Shadows stretched and bent gently across the pavement, moving with a quiet rhythm that mirrored the pulse of the world. Morty felt a soft awareness settle in him, a recognition that the patterns around him, in light, movement, and sound, were reflections of life's delicate balance. He paused near a small fountain, watching water ripple outward in endless circles. Morty reflected that even small, unnoticed actions could radiate in ways unseen, shaping moments and experiences in subtle but lasting ways. He thought of the Beths, the child he had helped, and even Rick, recognizing that care, attentiveness, and empathy left traces that accumulated quietly over time. Heroism, he understood, often existed not in spectacle, but in consistent, gentle presence. A soft breeze drifted past, brushing against Morty's face and rustling the leaves overhead. He observed the quiet choreography of birds flying in arcs, their wings moving in synchronized patterns, and felt a subtle awe at the way life unfolded in these delicate motions. Every action, no matter how small, seemed to carry resonance, a thread in the invisible web connecting all living things. Morty realized that noticing these threads was itself a form of participation, a way of honoring the world's patient generosity. He continued along a familiar path, the gentle hum of life surrounding him. Morty thought of moments he had overlooked. In the past, a shared smile, a word offered in passing, a quiet gesture of understanding, and understood how they had accumulated into lasting impact. The subtle heroism of attentiveness, of choosing to care even when unnoticed, became more tangible as he reflected on these moments. Each action, however gentle, had a way of shaping the world and his own heart. As stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, faint points of light pulsing patiently, Morty found a small hill to sit upon. He felt the rhythm of the universe in the quiet breeze, the sway of the branches, and the distant gentle hum of life. Sleep tugged softly at the edges of his mind, and he allowed himself to sink into the reassurance that the smallest, most deliberate acts of care and observation were threads in a vast tapestry, subtle yet enduring, carrying meaning across time, space, and memory. Morty wandered through the quiet town as the night deepened, the air soft and carrying faint hints of earth and distant rain. Shadows leaned gently across the pavement, bending and stretching with the subtle glow of lanterns. Morty noticed the small, persistent patterns in light and movement, the sway of branches, the shimmer of a window, the faint hum of life, and felt a quiet awareness settle in him. Each tiny observation seemed to echo the enduring, gentle rhythm of existence. He paused beneath a familiar tree, its branches spreading overhead like quiet arms. Morty reflected on the impermanence of things, the fleeting nature of moments, the passing of people, and the gentle erosion of places he had known. Yet within this impermanence, he also sensed a quiet persistence. The way memories linger, how connections endure, and how acts of care ripple outward in subtle, lasting ways. Morty realized that noticing, remembering, and quietly participating in the world was a way of honoring both its transience and its persistence. The breeze brushed lightly against his face, rustling leaves that fell slowly to the ground. Morty observed their descent, each one a small, graceful surrender to gravity, yet moving in patterns shaped by unseen currents. It struck him that life often worked in similar ways. Moments unfolded, relationships shifted, yet certain threads, empathy, attention, quiet care, remained resilient, bending and flowing without breaking. He thought of Rick, the Beths, and the child in the park. Their presence, actions, and words had left traces within him, faint yet enduring, like shadows cast across the mind's quiet spaces. Morty understood that impermanence did not erase significance, rather, it heightened the importance of noticing, caring, and being present. Even small gestures mattered, quietly shaping the contours of life and memory. As the sky darkened, stars began to appear, patient and distant, shining in patterns Morty could barely comprehend. He sat on a familiar bench beneath the tree, letting the gentle pull of night and the quiet rhythm of the universe envelop him. Sleep brushed lightly at the edges of his awareness, carrying reassurance and calm. Morty allowed himself to rest in the understanding that impermanence and continuity existed together, that gentle acts of care and quiet attention were threads that endured even as moments passed, stretching softly across time, space, and memory. Morty walked slowly along a familiar path as the night deepened, noticing how the subtle interplay of light and shadow painted the world around him. Lanterns glowed softly, their warm radiance spilling onto cobblestones and grass, while the cool breeze carried faint scents of earth and distant flowers. Each step felt deliberate yet effortless, a quiet rhythm in harmony with the gentle pulse of the world. He paused to watch a small stream glimmering in the moonlight, its surface rippling gently with each whisper of wind. Morty realized that life's beauty often appeared in such subtle movements, small, quiet, and easily overlooked. The water reflected not only the sky above, but also the faint traces of his own thoughts and feelings, a reminder that noticing was itself a form of care. Memories drifted softly through his mind, recalling moments with the Beths, the child in the park, and Rick. Morty thought about how small gestures, gentle words, and quiet attentiveness had left lasting impressions, creating connections that were invisible yet deeply meaningful. Each memory felt like a soft thread, weaving itself into the larger tapestry of his life, delicate yet unbreakable. A cat passed silently along the path, its movements precise and unhurried. Morty smiled at its calm confidence, noticing how even creatures that moved through the world unnoticed carried grace, rhythm, and presence. He understood that wonder did not always announce itself. It often existed quietly in the corners of observation, in the gentle awareness of subtle patterns and motions. As the night grew deeper, stars appeared in patient clusters across the sky, their soft light a quiet hymn of continuity and calm. Morty found a small hill to sit upon, feeling the gentle sway of the grass beneath him, the cool air brushing against his face. He reflected on the quiet heroism of attentiveness, the way small, deliberate acts of presence and care created ripples that extended far beyond what could be seen. Sleep drew near, carrying the reassurance of a world that was both intricate and tender, filled with subtle joys and enduring connections. Morty rested in the knowledge that noticing, observing, and quietly participating in life's rhythms were themselves acts of significance. And as he let his body and mind settle, he felt the calm resonance of the universe wrapping around him, carrying him gently toward rest, awareness, and quiet wonder. Morty wandered along a quiet lane as the night stretched its soft, indigo veil over the town. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and evening blooms, carrying a gentle reminder that life moved quietly, even when unnoticed. Lanterns flickered with warm persistence, casting elongated shadows across familiar walls and paths. Morty felt the slow pulse of the world around him, a rhythm both calming and reassuring, as if each movement carried quiet intention. He paused at a small garden gate, noticing how the leaves shimmered faintly under the soft lantern glow. Morty thought of the Beths, the child he had helped, and even Rick. Each connection, however subtle, had left a trace within him. These traces were not loud or dramatic, yet they shaped him quietly, guiding his understanding, his empathy, and his sense of presence. He realized that gentle acts of care, patience, and attention were the kind of heroism that endured beyond immediate perception. A breeze drifted past, carrying the subtle sound of rustling leaves and distant water. Morty bent slightly to watch the ripples in a nearby puddle, noticing how light and movement intertwined delicately. The patterns felt alive, echoing a larger truth. Life's beauty and significance often resided in subtle shifts, in moments that demanded observation, patience, and reflection. Even fleeting gestures could leave impressions that lasted far longer than one might imagine. He continued down the lane, observing shadows bend across cobblestones, the gentle sway of branches, and the faint, comforting hum of nocturnal life. Morty thought about memory, not as a fixed record, but as a living presence shaped by noticing, reflection, and care. Each memory, no matter how small, contributed to the quiet tapestry of his experiences, layering tenderness, understanding, and connection into the fabric of his consciousness. The stars began to appear, patient and soft, their faint light threading across the sky. Morty found a familiar bench beneath a gentle tree, leaning back and letting the cool night air brush against him. He reflected on small joys, subtle wonders, and the quiet persistence of emotional connections, the kind that required no announcement, no applause, only awareness and gentle attention. Sleep edged closer, bringing the reassurance that presence, care, and attentiveness were threads that endured across time, space, and memory. Morty allowed himself to sink into the soft rhythm of night, trusting in the continuity of connection and the quiet, enduring beauty of life's smallest gestures. The gentle cadence of the world, of light and shadow, memory and reflection, wrapped around him, inviting calm, rest, and a patient, deep sense of wonder. Morty walked along the quiet streets as the night deepened, noticing the gentle shimmer of lamplight across the pavement. The air carried the faint scent of earth and distant flowers, a reminder that life's beauty often existed in quiet, unnoticed places. Shadows stretched softly along walls and paths, bending and folding with patient grace. Morty felt a sense of calm settle in him, a recognition that the smallest details held enduring significance if one chose to notice. He paused beneath a familiar tree, the branches spreading overhead like quiet arms. Morty reflected on the gentle persistence of memory and connection, the ways that small gestures, subtle acts of care, and quiet attentiveness endured even as moments passed and people changed. He understood that letting go did not erase impact, rather, it highlighted the enduring beauty of presence, observation, and gentle influence. A breeze drifted past, rustling leaves and carrying faint whispers of distant life. Morty watched a puddle nearby, its surface reflecting lantern light in delicate, shifting patterns. He realized that life, like water, moved gently, folding and bending in ways that shaped the world and one's own heart. Even subtle gestures, unnoticed or fleeting, left traces that resonated long after the moment passed. He thought of Rick, the Beths, and the child in the park, recalling soft smiles, small conversations, and quiet moments of shared attention. Morty felt the warmth of these connections as a gentle current beneath the surface of his thoughts. Each memory, each act of quiet care, was a thread woven into a larger tapestry, subtle yet unbreakable, connecting him to the world, to others, and to himself. The stars emerged above, patient and soft, their faint glow threading across the sky like delicate punctuation in the story of the night. Morty found a familiar bench to sit upon, leaning back and letting the cool air brush against his face. He allowed himself to sink into stillness, trusting in the persistent, gentle rhythm of life. Sleep approached gradually, carrying reassurance, calm, and the quiet knowledge that every small act of care, attentiveness, and presence was meaningful. As the night enveloped him, Morty rested in the enduring beauty of subtle connections, soft memories, and the quiet, persistent heartbeat of the world. And with that, he stretched into the stars. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man.